Good evening, Mr. Internet. Welcome to the first inaugural edition of the content reading series. It's not Sunday morning. It's Tuesday night. That's correct. I'm 1 minute late. Forgive me. If Mike Gomez was here, we'd be here on time. But I don't want to waste too much time. What are we reading? It's that thing over here. Wait, no, it's on this side. But I tend to toggle. Oh, much better. Alan Watts, the book on the taboo against knowing who you are. If you listen to the show at all on Sundays, if you don't, you should. But if you did, you'd know Mike and I have discussed Alan Watts, his teachings in this book specifically a lot. Alan Watts, very popular British philosophizer, was a person who brought a lot of Taoist, Buddhist, Hindu teachings to the West in the 70s and whatnot. A lot of his lectures on YouTube. Very fun, very good to watch. But this is a fantastic book. So I want to do a little live reading. We'll see how this goes. We're going to do the first chapter tonight. We're going to see what happens. Okay. Um, and so, yeah, let's dig into it. Let me post this here. I don't want to talk too much. And yeah, if you have any comments, concerns, maybe I'll editorialize a little bit on the particularly interesting things Mr. Watts has to say, as there are so many. This is Alan Watts, the book on the taboo against knowing who you are. Those are all of Alan Watts's children and grandchildren. I'm not sure what the delineation is there with the stars. It's not important, Derek. Don't get hung up on stuff like that. This book originally published in 1966, if I'm not mistaken. Let's start with the preface. This book explores an unrecognized but mighty taboo, our tacit conspiracy to ignore who or what we really are. Briefly, the thesis is that the prevalent sensation of oneself as a separate ego enclosed in a bag of skin is a hallucination which accords neither with Western science nor with the experimental philosophy religions of the East, in particular the central and germinal Vedanta philosophy of Hinduism. This hallucination underlies the misuse of technology for the violent subjugation of man's natural environment and, consequently, its eventual destruction. We are therefore in urgent need of a sense of our own existence which is in accord with the physical fact and which overcomes our feeling of alienation from the universe. For this purpose, I have drawn on the insights of Vedanta, stating them, however, in a completely modern and Western style, so that this volume makes no attempt to be a textbook on or an introduction to Vedanta in an ordinary sense. It is rather a cross fertilization of Western science with an Eastern intuition. Particular thanks are due to my wife, Mary Jane, for her careful editorial work and comments on the manuscript. Come on, so cute. Gratitude is also due to the Bollingen Foundation for its support of a project which included the writing of this book, Sausalito, California, January 1966. Mr. Alan Watts. Chapter 1, Inside Information. Just what should a young man or woman know in order to be in the know? Is there, in other words, some inside information, some special taboo, some real lowdown on life and existence that most parents and teachers either don't know or won't tell? In Japan, it was once customary to give young people about to be married a, quote, pillow book. This was a small volume of woodblock prints, often colored, showing all the details of sexual intercourse. It wasn't just that, as the Chinese say, one picture is worth 10,000 words. It was also that it spared parents the embarrassment of explaining these intimate matters face to face. But today in the West, you can get such information at any newsstand. Sex is no longer a serious taboo. Teenagers sometimes know more about it than adults. But if sex is no longer the big taboo, what is? There is always something taboo, something repressed, unadmitted, or just glimpsed quickly out of the corner of one's eye because a direct look is too unsettling. Taboos lie within taboos, like the skins of an onion. What, then, would be the book which fathers might slip to their sons and mothers to their daughters without ever admitting it openly? In some circles, there is a strong taboo on religion. Even in circles where people go to church or read the Bible, here, religion is one's own private business. It's bad form or uncool to talk or argue about it, and very bad indeed to make a big show of piety. Yet when you get in on the inside of almost any standard brand religion, you wonder what on earth the hush was about. Surely the book I have in mind wouldn't be the Bible, the good book, the good book, That fascinating anthology of ancient wisdom, history, and fable, which has so far, for so long, been treated as a sacred cow that it might as well be locked up for a century or two so that men could hear it again with clean ears. There are indeed secrets in the Bible, and some very subversive ones, but they're also muffled up in complications, in archaic symbols and ways of thinking. That Christianity has become incredibly difficult to explain to a modern person. That is, unless you are content to water it down to being good and trying to imitate Jesus. But no one ever explains just how to do that. To do it, you must have a particular power from God known as grace. But all that we really know about grace is that some get it and some don't. The standard brand religions, whether Jewish, Christian, Mohammedan, Hindu, or Buddhist, are, as now practiced, like exhausted mines, very hard to dig. With some exceptions, not too easily found. Their ideas about man and the world, their imagery, their rights, and their notions of the good life don't seem to fit in with the universe as we know it now, or with a human world that is changing so rapidly that much of what one learns in school is already obsolete on graduation day. The book I'm thinking about would not be religious in the usual sense, but it would have to discuss many of the things which religions have been concerned: the universe and man's place in it, the mysterious center of experience, which we call I myself, the problems of life and love, pain and death, and the whole question of whether existence has meaning in any sense of the word. For there is a growing apprehension that existence is a rat race in a trap. Living organisms, including people, are merely tubes which put things in one end and let them out at the other, which both keeps them doing it and in the long run wears them out. So, to keep the farce going, the tubes find new ways of making new tubes, which also put things in at one end and let them out the other. At the input end, they even develop ganglia of nerves called brains with eyes and ears, so they can more easily scrounge around for things to swallow. As and when they get enough to eat, they use up their surplus energy by wiggling in complicated patterns, making all sorts of noises by blowing air in and out of the input hole, and gathering and gathering together in groups to fight with other groups, of course. In time, the tubes grow such an abundance of attached appliances that they're hardly recognizable as mere tubes, and they manage to do this in a staggering variety of forms. There is a vague rule not to eat tubes of your own form, but in general, there is a serious competition as to who is going to be the top type of tube. You've been to high school, right? All this seems marvelously futile, and yet, when you begin to think about it, it begins to be more marvelous than futile. Indeed, it seems extremely odd. It is a special kind of enlightenment to have this feeling that the way things normally are, is odd, uncanny, and highly improbable. G.K. Chesterton once said that it is one thing to be amazed at a gorgon or a griffin, creatures which do not exist, but it is quite another and much higher thing to be amazed at a rhinoceros or a giraffe, creatures which do exist and look as if they don't. This feeling of universal oddity includes a basic and intense wondering about the sense of things. Why, of all possible worlds, this colossal and apparently unnecessary multitude of galaxies in a mysteriously curved space time continuum? These myriads of differing tube species playing frantic games of one upmanship, these numberless ways of quote unquote doing it, from the elegant architecture of the snow crystal or the diatom to the startling magnificence of the lyre bird or the peacock. Ludwig Wittgenstein and other modern logical philosophers have tried to suppress this question by saying that it has no meaning and that it ought not to be asked. Most philosophical problems are to be solved by getting rid of them, by coming to the point where you see that such questions as why this universe are a kind of intellectual neurosis, a misuse of words, in that the question sounds sensible, but is actually as meaningless as asking where is this universe, when the only things that are anywhere must be somewhere inside the universe. The task of philosophy is to cure people of such nonsense. Wittgenstein, as we shall see, had a point there. Nevertheless, wonder is not a disease. Wonder and its expression in poetry and the arts are among the most important things which seem to distinguish men from other animals, and intelligent sensitive people from morons. Is there then some kind of a lowdown on this astounding scheme of things? Something that never really gets out through the usual channels for the answer? The historic religions and philosophies? There is. It has been said again and again, but in such a fashion that we today in this particular civilization do not hear it. We not realize that it is utterly subversive, not so much in the political and moral sense, as it is that it turns our ordinary view of things, our common sense, inside out and upside down. It may, of course, have political and moral consequences, but as yet we have no clear idea of what they may be. Hitherto, this inner revolution of the mind has been confined to rather isolated individuals. It has never, to my knowledge, been widely characteristic of communities or societies. It has often been thought too dangerous for that, hence the taboo. The world is in an extremely dangerous situation, and serious diseases often require the risk of a dangerous cure, like the Pasteur serum for rabies. It is not that we may simply blow up the planet with nuclear bombs, strangle ourselves with overpopulation, destroy our natural resources through poor conservation, or ruin the soil and its products with improperly understood chemicals and pesticides. Because we're doing that. Beyond all these is the possibility that civilization may be a huge technological success, but through methods that most people will find baffling, frightening, and disorienting. Because for one reason alone, the methods will keep changing. It may be like playing a game in which the rules are constantly changed without ever being made clear, a game from which one cannot withdraw without suicide, and in which one can never return to an older form of the game. But the problem of man and technics is almost always stated in the wrong way. It is said that humanity has evolved one sidedly, growing in technical power without any comparable growth in moral integrity. Some prefer to say, without comparable progress in education and rational thinking. Yet the problem is more basic. The root of the matter is the way in which we feel and conceive ourselves as human beings, our sensation of being alive, our individual existence and identity. We suffer from a hallucination, from a false and distorted sensation of our own existence as living organisms. Most of us have the sensation that I myself is a separate center of feeling and action, living inside and bounded by the physical body, a center which confronts an external world of people and things making contact through the senses with a universe both alien and strange. Everyday figures of speech reflect this illusion. I came into this world. You must face reality, the conquest of nature. This feeling of being lonely and very temporary visitors in the universe is in flat contradiction to everything known about man and all other living organisms as well in the sciences. We do not, quote unquote, come into this world. We come out of it as leaves from a tree. As the ocean waves, the universe peoples. Every individual is an expression of the whole realm of nature, a unique action of the total universe. This fact is rarely, if ever, experienced by most individuals. Even those who know it to be true in theory do not sense or feel it, but continue to be aware of themselves as isolated egos inside bags of skin. The first result of this illusion is that our attitude to the world outside us is largely hostile. We are forever conquering nature, space and mountains and deserts and bacteria and insects instead of learning to cooperate with them in a harmonious order. In America, the great symbols of this conquest are the bulldozer and the rocket, the instruments that batter the hills into flat tracks for little boxes made of ticky-tacky and the great phallic projectile that blasts into the sky. Nonetheless, we have fine architects, as a parenthesis, nonetheless, we have fine architects who know how to fit houses into hills without ruining the landscape, and astronomers who know that the Earth is already way out in space, and that our first need for exploring other worlds is sensitive electronic instruments which, like our eyes, will bring the most distant objects into our own brains. The hostile attitude of conquering nature ignores the basic interdependence of all things and events. that the world beyond the skin is actually an extension of our own bodies and will end in destroying the very environment from which we emerge and upon which our whole life system depends. The second result of feeling we are separate minds in an alien and mostly stupid universe is that we have no common sense, no way of making sense of the world upon which we agree in common. Boy, haven't you felt that recently in the past, say, 4 years? It's just my opinion against yours. And therefore, the most aggressive and violent, and thus insensitive propagandist makes the decisions. A muddle of conflicting opinions united by a force of propaganda is the worst possible source of control for a powerful technology. It might seem, then, that our need is for some genius to invent a new religion, a philosophy of life, and a view of the world that is plausible and generally acceptable for the late 20th, now say 21st, century, and through which every individual can feel that the world as a whole and his own life in particular have meaning. This, as history has shown repeatedly, is not enough. Religions are divisive and quarrelsome. They are a form of one-upmanship because they depend upon separating the saved from the damned, the true believers from the heretics, the in-group from out-group. Even liberals play the game of we're more tolerant than you. Say political liberals too. Furthermore, as systems of doctrine, symbolism, and behavior, religions harden into institutions that must command loyalty, be defended and kept quote unquote pure. And because all belief is fervent hope and thus a cover up for doubt and uncertainty, nice, religions must make converts. The more people who agree with us, the less nagging insecurity about our own position. And in the end, one is committed to being a Christian or a Buddhist, come what may, in the form of any new knowledge. New and indigestible ideas have to be wangled into wangled, what a British term there. New and indigestible ideas have to be wangled into the religious tradition, however inconsistent with its original doctrines, so that the believer can still take his stand and assert, I am first and foremost a follower of God or whatever. Irrevocable commitment to any religion is not only intellectual suicide, it is positive unfaith because it closes the mind to any new vision of the world. Faith is, above all, openness, an act of trust in the unknown. An ardent Jehovah's Witness once tried to convince me that if there were a God of love, he would certainly provide mankind with a reliable and infallible textbook for the guidance of conduct. I replied that no considerate God would destroy the human mind by making it so rigid and unadaptable as to depend upon one book, the Bible, for all the answers. For the use of words, and thus of a book, is to point beyond themselves to a world of life and experience that is not mere words or even ideas. Just as money is not real, consumable wealth, books are not life. To idolize others is like eating for currency. Therefore, the book that I would like to slip to my children would be itself slippery. It would slip them into a new domain, not of ideas alone, but of experience, feeling. It would be a temporary medicine, not a diet. A point of departure, not a perpetual point of reference. They would read it and be done with it. For if it were well and clearly written, they would not have to go back to it again and again for hidden meanings or clarification of obscure trends. Now, that being said, I have read this book a number of times, but that's just because I like it. That's not because I don't get it. That's my fault. That's not Alan's fault. Okay. We do not need a new religion or a new Bible. We need a new experience, a new feeling of what it is to be I. The Lowdown, which is, of course, the secret and profound view on life, is that our normal sensation of self is a hoax, or at best, a temporary role that we are playing or have been conned into playing, with our own tacit consent, just as every hypnotized person is basically willing to be hypnotized. The most strong and first of all known taboos is the taboo against knowing who or what you really are behind the mask of your apparently separate, independent, and isolated ego. I am not thinking of Freud, Barber, id, or conscious as the actual reality behind the facade of personality. Freud, as we shall see, was under the influence of a 19th century fashion called reductionism, a curious need to put down human culture and intelligence by calling it a fluky byproduct, blind and irrational forces. They worked very hard then to prove that grapes can grow on thorn bushes. As is so often the way, what we have suppressed and overlooked is something startlingly obvious. The difficulty is that it is so obvious, basic, that one can hardly find words for it. The Germans call it a Hintergedanke, something like that. My apologies to Angela Merkel. An apprehension lying tacitly in the back of our minds, which we cannot easily admit even to ourselves. The sensation of I as a lonely and isolated center of being is so powerful and commonsensical, and so fundamental to our modes of speech and thought, to our laws and social institutions, that we cannot experience selfhood except as something superficial in the scheme of the universe. I seem to be a brief light that flashes but once in all the eons of time, a rare, complicated, and all too delicate organism on the fringe of biological evolution, where the wave of life bursts into the individual, sparkling with multicolored drops that gleam for a moment only to vanish forever. Under such conditioning, it seems impossible and even absurd to realize that myself does not reside in the drop alone, but in the whole surge of energy which ranges from the galaxies to the nuclear fields in my body. At this level of existence, I, quote unquote, am immeasurably old. My forms are infinite, and their comings and goings are simply the pulses or vibrations of a single and eternal flow of energy. The difficulty in realizing this to be so is that conceptual thinking cannot grasp it. It is as if the eyes were trying to look themselves directly, or as if one were trying to describe the color of a mirror in terms of the colors reflected in the mirror. Just as sight is something more than all things seen, the foundation or ground of our existence and our awareness cannot be understood in terms of things that are known. We are forced, therefore, to speak of it through myth, that is, through special metaphors, analogies, and images which say what it is like is distinct from what it is. At one extreme of its meaning, myth is fable, falsehood, or superstition. But at another, myth is a useful and fruitful image by which we make sense of life in somewhat the same way that we can explain electrical forces by comparing them with the behavior of water or air. Yet myth, in this second sense, is not to be taken literally, just as electricity is not to be confused with air or water. Thus, in using myth, one must take care not to confuse the image with the fact, which would be like climbing up a signpost instead of following the road. Myth, then, is the form in which I try to answer when children ask me those fundamental metaphysical questions which come so readily to their minds. Where did the world come from? Where did God make the world go? Why did God make the world? Where was I before I was born? Where do people die? Again and again, I have they be satisfied with a simple and very ancient story, which goes something like this. There was never a time when the world began, because it goes round and round like a circle, and there is no place on a circle where it begins. Look at my watch, which tells the time. It goes round, and so the world repeats itself again and again. But just as the hour hand of the watch goes up to 12 and 6, so too there is day and night, waking and sleeping, living and dying, summer and winter. You can't have any one of these without the other, because you wouldn't be able to know what black is unless you had seen it side by side with white, or white unless side by side with black. In the same way, there are times when the world is, and times when it isn't. For if the world went on and on without rest forever and ever, it would get horribly tired of itself. It comes and it goes. See it? No, you don't. So because it doesn't get tired of itself, it always comes back again after it disappears. It's like your breath. It goes in and out, in and out. And if you try and hold it all the time, you feel terrible. It's also like the game of hide and seek, because it's always fun to find new ways of hiding and to seek for someone who doesn't always hide in the same place. God also likes to play hide and seek, but because there is nothing outside God, he has no one but himself to play with. But he gets over the difficulty by pretending that he is not himself. This is his way of hiding from himself. He pretends that he is you and I and all the people in the world, all the animals, all the plants, all the rocks, all the stars. And in this way, he has strange and wonderful adventures, some of which are terrible and frightening. But these are just like bad dreams, for when he wakes up, they will disappear. Now, when God plays hide and pretends that he is you and I, he does it so well that it takes him a long time to remember where and how he hid himself. But that's the whole fun of it. That's just what he wanted to do. He doesn't want to find himself too quickly, for that would spoil the game. That is why it is so difficult for you and me to find out that we are God in disguise, pretending not to be himself. But when the game has gone on long enough, all of us will wake up, stop pretending, and remember that we are all one single self, the God who is all that there is and who lives forever and ever. Of course, you must remember that God isn't shaped like a person. People have skins, and there's always something outside of our skins. If there wouldn't be a difference between what is inside and outside our bodies. Bodies. But God has no skin and no shape because there isn't any outside to him. With a sufficiently intelligent child, Watts adds, I illustrate this with a Mobius strip, a ring of paper tape twisted once in such a way that it only has one side and one edge. I'm not sure what that is. If you are, send me a picture. Text me. Call me later. The inside and the outside of God are the same. And though I have been talking about God as he and not she, God isn't a man or a woman. I didn't say it because we usually say it for things that aren't alive. God is the self of the world, but you can't see God for the same reason a mirror can't see your own eyes, and you certainly can't bite your own teeth or look inside your own head. Yourself is that cleverly hidden because it is God hiding. You may ask why God sometimes hides in the form of horrible people, or pretends to be people who suffer great disease and pain. Remember, first, that he isn't really doing this to anyone but himself. Remember, too, that in almost all the stories you enjoy, there have to be bad people as well as good people. For the thrill of the tale is to find out how the good people will get the better of the bad. It's the same as when we play cards. At the beginning of the game, we shuffle them all into a mess, which is like the bad things in the world. But the point of the game is to put the mess into good order, and the one who does it best is the winner. Then we shuffle the cards once more and play again, and so it goes with the world. This story, obviously mythical in form, is not given as a scientific description of the way things are. Based on the analogies of games and drama, and using that much worn out word God for the player, the story claims only to be like the way things are. I use it just as astronomers use the image of inflating a black balloon with white spots on it for the galaxies to explain the expanding universe. But to most children and many adults, the myth is at once intelligible, simple, and fascinating, myself included. By contrast, so many other mythical explanations of the world are crude, tortuous, and unintelligible. But many people think that believing in the unintelligible propositions and symbols of their religions is the test of true faith. I believe, said Tertullian of Christianity, because it is absurd. People who think for themselves do not accept ideas on this kind of authority. They don't feel commanded to believe strange things as Abraham commanded God to sacrifice his son Isaac. As T. George Harris put it, the social hierarchies of the past, where some boss above you always punished any error, conditioned men to feel a chain of harsh authority reaching all the way up there. We don't feel this bond today's egalitarianism. We don't even have, since Dr. Spock, many Jehovah-like fathers in the human family. So the average unconscious no longer learns to seek forgiveness from a wrathful God above. But, Harris continues, our generation knows a cold hell, solitary confinement in this life without a God to damn or save it. Until man figures out the trap and hunts, the ultimate ground of being, he has no reason at all for his existence. Empty, finite, he knows only that he will soon die. Since this life has no meaning and he sees no future in life, he's not really a person, but a victim of self-extinction. The ultimate ground of being is Paul Tillich's decontaminated term for God, and would also do for the self of the world, as I put it in my story for children. But the secret which my story slips over to the children is that the ultimate ground of being is you. Not, of course, the everyday you, which the ground is assuming or pretending to me, but that inmost self which escapes inspection because it's always the inspector. This, then, is the taboo of taboos. You're it. I know. Yet in our culture, this is the touchstone of insanity, the blackest of blasphemies, and the wildest of delusions. This, we believe, is the ultimate in megalomania, an inflation of the ego, complete absurdity. Though we cultivate the ego with one hand, we knock it down with the other. From generation to generation, we kick the stuffing out of our children to teach them to know their place and to behave, think, and feel with proper modesty as befits one little ego among many. As my mother used to say, you're not the only pebble on the beach. Just picture Alan Watts's British mother. Oh my goodness. What a woman. She's probably great. You're not the only on the beach. That's what she sounded like. Anyone in his right mind who believes that he is God should be crucified or burned at the stake. Though now we take the more charitable view that no one in his right mind could believe such nonsense. Only a poor idiot could conceive himself as the omnipotent ruler of the world and expect everyone else to fall down and worship. But this is because we think of God as the king of the universe, the absolute technocrat who personally and consciously controls every details of his cosmos. And that is not the kind of God in my story. In fact, it isn't my story at all, for any student of the history of religions will know that it comes from ancient India and is the mythical way of explaining the Vedanta philosophy. Vedanta is the teaching of the Upanishads, a collection of dialogues, stories, and poems, some of which go back to at least 800 BC. Sophisticated Hindus do not think of God as a special and separate super person who rules the world from above like a monarch. Their God is underneath rather than above everything, and he, or it, plays the world from inside. One might say that if religion is the opium of the people, the Hindus have the inside dope. What is more, no Hindu can realize that he is God in disguise without seeing at the same time that this is true of everyone and everything else. In the Vedanta philosophy, nothing exists except God. There seem to be other things than God, but only because he is dreaming them up and making them his disguises to play hide and seek with himself. The universe of seemingly separate things is therefore real only for a while, not eternally real, for it comes and goes as the self hides and seeks itself. But Vedanta is much more than the idea or the belief that this is so. It is centrally and above all the experience, the immediate knowledge of it being so. For this reason, such a complete subversion of our ordinary way of seeing things. It turns the world inside out and outside in. Likewise, a saying attributed to Jesus runs, when you make the two one, and when you make the inner the outer, and the outer as the inner, and the above as the below, then shall you enter. I am the light that is above them all. I am the all. And the all came forth from me, and the all attained to me. Cleave a piece of wood, and I am there. Lift up the stone, and you will find me there. Today, the Vedanta discipline comes down to us after centuries of involvement with all the forms, attitudes, and symbols of Hindu culture in its flowering and slow demise over nearly 2,800 years, sorely wounded by Islamic fanaticism and corrupted by British Puritanism, as so many gosh darn things in this world were and continue to be. As often set forth, Vedanta rings no bell in the West and attracts mostly the fastidiously spiritual and diaphanous kind of people for whom incarnation in a physical body is just too disgusting to be borne. But it is impossible to state its essentials in a present-day idiom, and when this is done without exotic trappings, Sanskrit terminology, and excessive postures of spirituality, the message is not only clear to people with no special interest in Oriental religions, it is also the very jolt that we need to kick ourselves out of our isolated sensation of self. But this must not be confused with our usual ideas of practice of unselfishness, which is the effort to identify with others and their needs while still under the strong illusion of being no more than a skin-contained ego. Such unselfishness is apt to be a highly refined egotism, comparable to the in-group, which plays the game of we're more tolerant than you. The Vedanta was not originally moralistic. It did not urge people to ape the saints without sharing their real motivations, or to ape motivations without sharing the knowledge which sparks them. And for this reason, the book I would pass to my children would contain no sermons, no shoulds, and no oughts. Genuine love comes from knowledge, not from a sense of duty or guilt. How would you like to be an invalid mother with a daughter who can't marry because she feels she ought to look after you and therefore hates you? My wish would be to tell not how things ought to be, but how they are, and how and why we ignore them as they are. You cannot teach an ego to be anything but egotistic, even though egos have the subtlest ways of pretending to be reformed. The basic thing is therefore to dispel, by experiment and experience, the illusion of oneself as a separate ego. Consequences may not be behavior along the lines of conventional morality. It may well be, as the squares said of Jesus, look at him, a glutton and a drinker, a friend of tax gatherers and sinners. Imagine the people who in his time just hated on Jesus to his face. Whew, that's awesome. Furthermore, on seeing through the illusion of the ego, it is impossible to think of oneself as better than or superior to others for having done so. In every direction, there is just the one self playing its myriad games of hide and seek. Birds are not better than the eggs from which they have broken. Indeed, it could be said that a bird is one egg's way of becoming other eggs. Egg is ego, and the bird is the liberated self. There is a Hindu myth of the self as a divine swan which laid the egg from which the world was hatched. Thus, I'm not even saying that you ought to break out of your shell. Sometime, somehow, you, the real you, the self, will do it anyhow. But it's not impossible that the play of the self will be to remain unawakened in most of its human disguises, and so bring the drama of life on earth to its close in a vast explosion. Another Hindu myth says that as time goes on, life in the world gets worse and worse, until at last the destructive aspect of the self, the god Shiva, dances a terrible dance which consumes everything in fire. There follow, says the myth, 4,320,000 years of total peace during which the self is just itself and does not play hide. And then the game begins again, starting off as a universe of perfect splendor, which begins to deteriorate only after 1,728,000 years. And every round of the game is so designed that the forces of darkness present themselves for only 1/3 of the time, enjoying at the end a brief but quite illusory triumph. Today, we calculate the life of this planet alone in much vaster periods. But of all ancient civilizations, the Hindus had the most imaginative vision of cosmic time. Yet remember, this story of the cycles of the world's appearance and disappearance is myth, not science, parable rather than prophecy. It is a way of illustrating the idea that the universe is like the game of hide and seek. If then, I am not saying that you ought to awaken from the ego illusion and help save the world from disaster, why the book? Why not sit back and let things take their course? Simply that it is part of things taking their course that I write. As a human being, it is just my nature to enjoy and share philosophy. I do this in the same way that some birds are eagles and some doves, some flowers, lilies, and some roses. I realize, too, that the less I preach, the more likely I am to be heard. And there we have the end of chapter 1. So many good things in there. I'd like to jump really quickly to the idea of the age periods in Hinduism. They say there's 4.3 million years of total peace. Then I think it's 1/3. It's half of that, which is the 1.7 million, is 1/3 of the time bad. Then I think it's half bad. Oh, no, then I think half, and then it's three quarters bad. I don't know. They did a lot of math, honestly. Chalk it up to one of those things. Like he's saying, it is what do you say? It's parable rather than prophecy. Um, the idea of the universe being in these enormous cycles is actually kind of upsetting to me because, as far as I understand it, they're yugas, the age periods of Hinduism. And according to this, we would be in the Kali Yuga, which would be the age of destruction where evil wins. And, just based on the past a couple of years, it does seem like everything's going to hell. And unfortunately, it has to get way worse before we emerge into. So, look, it's going to be bad for a while, and it could be a very long time. But once we get through this period, we will reach this. He's saying 4.3 million years of peace. So, I mean, all I'm saying is I'm looking forward to that. So there you have it, folks. That's chapter 1. Thank you for checking it out. Content. Easiest way to find us, go to Linktree /content content. We're on Apple, Spotify, all that stuff. I'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks for tuning in. We will be actually back tomorrow night with Harrison Crown, mental health professional. We'll be back Thursday night with Julie McVeigh, author. It's going to be fantastic. Of course, Mike and I will be around on Sunday. So thanks for watching. I'll be back with chapter 2 maybe next Tuesday. We'll see what happens. Talk to you soon.